Hello, Freight Buyers Club here at Long Beach 2025. And I'm here today with Jon Gold, who's VP Supply Chain and Customs Policy for the National Retail Federation. How are you, Jon?
Good, Mike. How are you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. Nice to be here. You've just come out of the shippers session on the first day of TPM. We've had rather a lot of chaos this year. What was the feeling in that room?
I think right now we're just trying to figure out what's going to future is going to hold for the supply chain. What are we looking at as far as the tariffs going into effect or not? What that means for the supply chain? What kind of changes are we seeing in sourcing? All those fun issues that we're trying to figure out as folks are trying to plan their supply chains for the next 6, 9, 12 months. Whatever gets announced tomorrow or Tuesday or in the future, what's the impact and how do they pivot appropriately?
How have people been coping with the early weeks of 2025? And I'll just recap for Freight Buyers Club viewers. I mean, at the start of the year, we had a certain amount of front loading and uncertainty around that potential US Gulf and East Coast port strike. Now, that didn't happen, but we had all that uncertainty about tariffs. So did we see a lot of front loading, and how are people approaching it now with all of this added uncertainty? And we'll come to the specifics of the tariffs in a moment, but just please run us through the early weeks of 2025.
Sure. I mean, I think you saw some front loading that occurred, again, as we were uncertain about what was going to happen with the East Coast and Gulf Coast port negotiations. Thankfully, they got the deal, but before that, folks were trying to plan ahead and brought product in advance. We obviously had the President Trump talking about the potential for tariffs on day one with the inauguration. So again, folks are trying to plan for that. That didn't happen. So, now folks are trying to figure out, when tariffs are going to go into effect and how do they plan appropriately.
Can we just look at some of those tariffs individually from a retailer perspective? So one of the ones we're waiting for in the next day or two is what's going to happen in North America. This is 25% tariff on Canada and on Mexico. How is that affecting your members?
Sure. So we had the initial announcement of the Canada and Mexico tariffs on border-related issues because of immigration and the fentanyl issue. They were supposed to go into effect on February 4th. The president then delayed it. Last week, he started talking about the tariffs going into effect on the 4th now. But I think there are still ongoing negotiations. So I think it's still unclear if the tariffs are going to take effect on the 4th or not. I think hopefully we'll know tomorrow whether or not it's going to be the case, because he's going to have to update the executive orders and the Federal Register notices to actually put those into place. We also have the additional 10% on China that he talked about last week as well. So folks are trying to plan accordingly, but I think they're waiting to see if the tariffs are actually going to take effect to make their plans and decisions on what those impacts are going to be.
And also we've got the possible 25% tariff on the EU. The UK may well have escaped at something. It's the only country in the world without a surplus with the US. So what does all this mean? Is there a message on tariffs from retailers in general that you could possibly share with the Freight Buyers Club?
Yeah, I think, look, there are more tariffs that are coming. The president talked about we've got tariffs on steel and aluminum, which certainly have an impact on retail, especially with the derivative products that are the finished goods. We announced on copper. He just announced yesterday on lumber. We're looking at autos. We're looking at other sector categories. And then, as you noted, the EU, but it's who's next. So I think for retailers, again, trying to plan and prepare and understand what their supply chains are going to look like. And the thing we need to understand is that all these tariffs are additive, which is what folks hadn't really thought about, the fact that you're going to add these 25 on top of everything else. So I think we're still planning and still waiting to see what's going to happen.
And how do people make long-term planning decisions when they don't know where tariffs might go next? I mean, we've seen since the first Trump administration, we saw a lot of sourcing decisions made on that landscape, but now the landscape's being thrown up in the air again. The board's up in, all the pieces are in disarray. You can't make long-term planning decisions, presumably, on this.
That's one of the biggest challenges, is trying to figure out where you're going to make your long-term planning and sourcing from. Folks took the hint back in 2018 with the first go-around on the China tariffs, the Section 301. They moved out of China. They moved to Southeast Asia. They moved to Mexico. They moved elsewhere. But now we're hitting all those countries with tariffs as well, and others that might come down the pike. So I think folks are, again, trying to figure out what it all means and to plan accordingly. With the constant social media messages that are coming out, it's tough to plan just based on that. You actually have to see actual action to understand if it's going to take effect or not and for how long.
And obviously, TPM 25 is where a lot of ocean shipping contracts are signed. Your members are here. How does this affect their ability to negotiate with the carriers? There's with so much unknown. With Suez, we haven't even mentioned the Suez Canal and whether that might reopen this year.
It's a challenge because, again, you've got to plan, in the future, but yet you don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs. We also have the issue of the China-built vessel fees for vessels arriving in the U.S., the port fees, based on the Section 301 investigation. So that's another issue that's going to impact rates because we know that those ocean carriers aren't going to pay that fee. It's going to get passed along to the cargo owner at the end of the day. But again, as folks are negotiating their rates now and those fees won't take effect for several months, how do you factor that into your conversations? It's a challenge.
I mean, I guess for some shippers that they may even be in a situation where tariffs are coming in as their products at sea. They don't know how much or what their profit will be before it arrives in the States. Is that how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you saw the on-the-water provision that was included, at least in the China tariffs that were put into place. They, gave them several weeks because understanding that tariffs would go into effect while cargo is being loaded or is, on en route to the U.S. So hopefully those on-the-water provisions will continue. But this is, again, one of the reasons why we want to push for an exclusions process for many of these goods that had been there, first go around. So something that we're trying to have conversations about the need for an effective, fair, and transparent exclusions process.
And one final question, John. Do you think that this administration is listening to U.S. business and U.S. retailers?
We certainly hope so. I think they understand the impact that the tariffs are going to have. I think, look, we agree with the president there are some certain challenges within our trading relationship with a wide variety of countries. We certainly think strategic tariffs have a role, but not doing them wide scale like we're seeing right now. They're going to hit everyday consumer goods. So we want to focus and really pay attention to those issues where we think we can achieve goals, but let's use a path other than just tariffs to achieve some of those goals. We would love to see new free trade agreements. Part of what the president had in his America First trade memo was looking at opportunities for new free trade agreements or sectoral agreements. We think that's a better way to address some of the challenges that we face with some of our trading partners.
Jon Gold, VP for Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation. Thanks for joining me today on the Freight Buyers Club.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.